Hello, welcome back to All for United WFC. We can see we've got a different kind of show today. I know all of you have been asking the questions, transfer windows, everything else that's going on. There's a lot going on around Manchester United women at the moment. So I thought the best person to get on here, Charlotte Harpur, women from The Athletic. Charlotte, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm very well, thanks. Connor, how are you?
Good, yes. Well, as we've just been discussing, busy week, 3 games in 7 days last week, but we keep moving on. Still got a couple more games to go before the international break. For people who maybe don't know then, if you just want to give yourself a brief introduction, how you got into women's football, right for The Athletic, all of that kind of thing.
I'm Charlotte Harpur. I am a football writer at The Athletic. I joined the news desk in June 2020, so coming up to 5 years now at The Athletic. And then switch over to women's football at the beginning of 2022, which coincided with the Lionesses winning the Euros. And then this September, I've moved up to Manchester to cover Manchester United, men, women, the club, still keeping an overview on women's football, but with more of a kind of Manchester focus.
See, there we go. So when I said the ideal person, this is what I meant when talking about on this one. And I'm going to reference this a few times, but obviously there are a couple of articles I'm going to link down below as well that people should go and read if they haven't already, because I'll be referencing them when we get through some of the questions. Now, for people who aren't aware, this obviously is a pre-record. We're recording this on Tuesday afternoon. So by the time this goes out, I'm going to start with the transfer window very briefly. There could be stories we know that could pop up in the next 24 hours in between recording this and when it comes out. But Charlotte, I just want to quickly ask you on transfers that we know have already happened, because you broke the story at the time, Hayley Ladd and Emma Watson at the time. I just wanted to briefly ask you on particularly Ladd, because that was the permanent one. Just from your point of view, do you know kind of how quick that happened? I think you actually wrote in your article just before Christmas that there was a very good chance that Ladd was going in January, that the club would listen to offers if the right offers were there. Was that a very quick deal that kind of went through, do you know, or like just some more detail, I guess, around how that one happened?
I think it was very clear that Hayley Ladd wasn't getting enough game time, and she wanted game time. So you had a problem, you needed a solution. And she was third choice at that time for United in that position, especially with Wales qualifying for the Euros. That accelerated that need for game time. And yeah, beginning of December, she was looking to leave, and Everton came up trumps for a permanent transfer.
I think as well, obviously, we've mentioned that a lot, even though she's not a United player. I think most United fans just wish her well, and I hope sounds like she settled in quite well over there. I think she's done had some good performances in the first couple of games there, so I'm really happy for her, from a game time point of view.
Yeah, and I think from United's perspective, they'd acknowledged the loyalty she had given the club with over 100 appearances, and didn't want to kind of get in the way of her reaching her peak fitness ahead of the summer. So I'm happy to listen to her wishes and accommodate her desire to move on if she wanted to.
No, absolutely, and fair play to her, because I think she spoke in an interview saying that she did consider it in the summer, last summer, about potentially moving away, but she did stick it out. Obviously, then it became apparent that game time just got less and less throughout the season. So, yeah, fair play to her, and I hope she does really well over at Everton on that one. A big name then I'm going to ask you, and I think this is the one name I think that's floating around the transfer window at the moment, because we're only a couple of days away from the deadline, is Chloe Kelly. Now, a report came out on Manchester Derby Day at the Etihad that United were potentially looking to bring her in on loan. It's pretty clear, I think, to most people that Kelly is wanting to leave Manchester City in some capacity. What can you say on that one in terms of United, just Kelly in general? Just, what's the kind of feeling around that one? Because the fan base is, I think, pretty split if a potential move to United would happen on that one.
I think you have to understand, Chloe Kelly's priority, and that is to play for England at the Euros this summer. And in order to do that, she needs game time. She needs game time in the next 6 months. So these next 6 months are crucial for her. Now, she can sign a pre-contract agreement with a foreign club to move in the summer, but that doesn't solve the issue of game time at City at this moment. We've seen City recruiting with Carrington as well. And so United's interest, I would say, keep an eye on the situation. I don't know to what extent City would sell to a rival, especially given how tight the Champions League spots are. But also, if Chloe Kelly's situation in terms of game time doesn't improve at City, then you're still at an impasse, and she'll reach her at the end of her contract this summer. It's a really, really crucial time for her at this moment, and I don't think, she wants to decide on a permanent move at this time in January. That will come in the summer when she has options as a free agent. So watch this space. Deadline day is approaching, and as I've just said, game time is priority.
And I think that's what makes me question a United move potentially. I don't know. We'll wait and see on that. As you said, watch this space. But I just don't think, for me, a United move works for her. I don't think it works for United, and I don't think it works for City. I just don't see where the benefits potentially are in either party. So, yeah, I'll be intrigued to see what happens with her. But as you said, I think it's pretty clear that she needs to move to get minutes ahead of the Euros, obviously in the summer, which she'll likely then move on permanently to a club if she hasn't already by the deadline this month. I just want to quickly ask you then, very last, so I'm going to keep the transfer window talk brief. Apologies, I know there's a lot of you that like the transfer window and the excitement around it. But my last kind of question on that before we talk about some other stuff is just, do you reckon there is going to be any more activity around United at the moment? Mark's going to speak about Saf. Like I said at the time of recording this, that's not been confirmed whether she's been loaned or not. I would hope that gets done before a deadline, because I just don't think you need 3 keepers, with obviously Kayla coming in earlier in the window. Do you expect much more activity now, or do you think it's pretty much a done thing for United and more of a summer kind of job for now?
I think at the start of the window, we anticipated quite a quiet January for Manchester United. It's a very difficult month to recruit in. And, they recruited well in the summer. They don't have any major long-term injuries to cover for. So I think they recruited in the key positions that they wanted to. Mark Skinner has always said, look, if it makes sense for the club, then they will act upon that. But never say never, but I don't expect a flurry of deals coming in. The one position that they really needed to strengthen for competition for places with Fallon Tullis-Joyce was as a second goalkeeper, and Kayla Rendell has come in from Southampton. As you said, Connor, what does that mean for Saf? It depends. But yeah, I think Manchester United will do their main business in the summer, and I don't think they're going to sign for the sake of signing. And they have to add value to those players. And at the moment, the squad is in a pretty decent shape.
I think as well, with a lot of players out of contract in the summer, I think women's football's still in that stage of just waiting until the players are out of contract. I know that we're seeing big fees. Chelsea have proven that in the last week or so, but a lot of teams still wait for those players that are out of contract. I'm sure United will spend money in the summer again, but it's that feeling of maybe some of those targets are some of those out of contract ones when we come to get to that. So, and like you said, I don't think United need a boatload right now of players. I think the squad is pretty good where it's at.
Yeah, as we were discussing earlier, I think it's there's going to be slightly more pressure on the wingers and the attackers to deliver that creativity that we haven't seen so far. Defensively, they've been pretty solid, and their key attribute, despite kind of conceding 4 in 2 games against City. But yeah, those positions, wide areas, attacking threats, especially with perhaps Jay-Z's absence. I don't know how long she will be away from the team for. That is the only question mark.
No, absolutely. And I think, that's the one thing for me. Obviously, scored 3 at the weekend against Brighton. Looked pretty good, actually. And I hope when Jace is back in the side that we do see the goals coming as well, albeit I don't know kind of what form. Well, nobody knows what form she'll come back into the team with, but we'll wait to see on that one. Right, my last point then in terms of around, I guess, ins, outs, all that kind of thing, and then I want to talk about a piece you wrote about Carrington, kind of the walk around there and some other stuff. I know there's going to be questions about Mark as well, so I'm going to leave that towards the end. Was just around other contracts, really, because we spoke a little bit about players that have signed recently. Grace Clinton's had the year or option triggered for another year to take it to 2026. We've seen Jay Riviere sign till 2028 with another option as well. Jess Simpson recently till 2027. So we've seen a few players extend, some longer than maybe others. There's still a couple of players out of contract this summer. I think Millie Turner being the biggest name of those. Have you heard anything in relation to those? Do you think they're going well in terms of talks there? Because I would imagine a lot of these talks are ongoing, not just with players out of contract this summer, planning ahead as well for next summer as well. Should United fans be worried a little bit? Because I still think there's some maybe scepticism. We've seen even last summer, fan favourites leave on free transfers at the end of that. But I don't know. I've always said on these shows, I hear that things are better now and that things are a little bit smoother. Would you tend to agree with that in terms of contracts that are maybe coming to the end?
Yeah, I wrote a piece coming up to this time last year, and which was very critical of how negotiations were done, especially with Alessio Russo, Ona Battier, and key decision makers at the top, kind of stifling and slowing down that process, and the stakeholders involved finding it very difficult to navigate through the layers of Manchester United, and that's just not the women's team, but those involved in negotiations responsible for the men's and women's teams. My piece in the summer noted, an improvement. It was a slicker system. It was more streamlined. Those dealing with negotiations knew, their point of contact. And you can only hope that Manchester United have learnt from previous mistakes. Mary Earps and Katie Zellum leaving for free. That can't happen again if you really, really want to keep those players. And you look at Chelsea, for example, and their succession plan. They're so good at thinking 2 transfer windows in advance. Who are the next generation coming up? What's our depth of squad looking like? Look at Naomi Girma, for example, a 24-year-old, the next generation of a centre-back, partnering alongside Millie Bright, who's 31. So always thinking that one step ahead. And I think that's where Manchester United need to be really proactive in the market. And that's what they haven't done in previous windows. I haven't heard anything regarding contract negotiations for those players who are out of contract. But you would hope that that would be at the forefront of the women's team's management's minds.
No, absolutely. And I think you mentioned obviously players leaving through. Grace Clinton, I think, is the big one with another year now. I think obviously some fans are maybe looking at that thinking, well, if she is to leave in 26, if she's not going to sign another extension, potentially leave for free, then maybe it is worth just maybe getting a fee for her come the summer. But that's a question for, I think, 5 or 6 months' time when we get closer to it, because I know contract talks are a big thing with a lot of, maybe a little bit of worry. I think Fallon, I think, is a worry amongst fans as well. Miyazawa and these types of players that fans, I guess, want to see another extension for. So fingers crossed that we get something on that one. But as I said, that's more of a couple months' time kind of discussion. But we've had a few, which is good for now. You've referenced a piece there, and so I want to talk about your visit to Carrington amongst a few other people as well that got led around and that kind of tour. So my baseline question to start this discussion is in terms of just what you found walking around Carrington. Like I said, I don't want you to give everything away because I want people to go and read your article on this one as well. But what you found walking around Carrington and just that kind of, I guess, the feeling for the women's team, at the training ground at the moment.
There'd been a lot of activity, especially in the media, with the women's team being moved out of their building due to the redevelopment of the men's first team building, and the women's team being placed in what was described as portable cabins. I spoke to the club when those stories ran, and they are portable cabins, but they're not portable cabins of the 1980s. They are sturdy, high quality, spacious sports portable cabins which allow the team to perform. I think what I really found among the tour at Carrington, led by interim head of women's football Matt Johnson, is a sense of camaraderie among the players. Simi and Jade and Anna Sandberg were sitting in the canteen, just finishing off their meal. Referenced Jimmy, the chef, who they absolutely love. That was the #1 priority, to keep him when they were shuffled about. The bao buns being one of their favourite meals. The there was news of the wall that Eric Ten Hag built. And that was, in terms of privacy of tactics, because you've got youth teams coming in on a weekend, and the women's teams then play on the far side of Carrington over there, so they have their space. The grass is, I'll say that again. The grass is cut to exactly the same length as Lee Sports Village, which I found an interesting nugget. The gym that they share with the academy, yes, it's a shared facility, but they see that as an upgrade on the previous gym that they had. You have analysis rooms, so it's functional. It's not ideal, but you have to also remember that the facilities that they were moved out of were good enough for a men's first team Premier League team, and they will move back into those facilities come the end of the season, and developments are on time to be finished by then, and that building has an upgrade as well. So it wasn't a ideal situation, but they wanted to keep the women's team where they had the best quality pitches. And you do get that sense of the players of they've been through a lot, right? It's not easy being at Manchester United, and the scrutiny that club has filters down to the women's team. But from what people have told me is that despite all the challenges, they really stick together as a group. You've got some... another thing that really stood out to me was you go into the women's team building and you go up 2 flights of stairs, and on the first flight is all the steps that they have achieved from being reformed in 2018 to then promotion to then winning that FA Cup title last year. And you've got a big quote on the back of that wall which says, "We are here to entertain, revolutionize, inspire and win." And then you turn the corner and the top golden step is to win the WSL, and I've forgotten what year.
By 2028, wasn't it?
Thank you, 2028. Yeah, to win by 2028. And in the background then is their FA Cup winning photo, lifting the trophy from last season. So there are quotes that adorn the walls from Usain Bolt and Roger Federer in their gym as well. So yeah, some nice bits of colour and nuggets to really think, okay, this is where they turn up to training every day at Carrington. And I think previously they had been siloed. It was just a separate, the women's team are over there. Dan Ashworth was the one which was really trying to knit that together and be the glue to make that more of a one club feel. Obviously, Dan Ashworth's departure was a significant blow to the women's team because he was responsible for making it a success. And I only just, the kind of penny dropped of at times how isolated they had been previously, whereas there was an effort to make it more of a familial environment between men, women and academy.
You said a couple of things I just want to quickly pick up on, but just firstly on Dan Ashworth, that was a question I was going to ask in just a second. But again, I think you wrote a piece on this in terms of the impact that had. So I remember that actually came out on the morning of I can't remember who United women were playing, but I remember parking up at LSV and seeing that story break that morning. It must have been either Liverpool or Spurs, I think it was at the time. But what impact has that had, on the women's team and everything else? In terms of the, I guess, day-to-day, has there been an impact, or is it more kind of things that maybe fans necessarily won't see? Or, what is that kind of impact there that, the knock-on effect really from his departure?
I think Dan Ashworth was the go-to from the kind of leadership team that Mark Skinner and Matt Johnson would have communication with. He visited the players, and Mark Skinner, he'd said he'd have monthly meetings with him. And so the kind of narrative was that, given Ashworth's experience at Brighton and with the FA, someone who really championed women's football, that he would be the one to make sure their voice was heard and make sure that they devised a strategy for that, WSL winning title by 2028. And I think with his departure, he really made an effort to, be at games, be a presence. That has, there's been a gap and a void that hasn't been filled, and the women's team are just getting on with it without, there is still communication there with Tom Crotty, who's the INEOS representative for the women's team, and Colette Roche. So there is communication lines there, but it's not as if he has been replaced as the sporting director. Of course, again, Emel Barada, the new CEO, was championed as it's come from Manchester City, who developed those training facilities and prioritized their women's team. But having covered the men's game or the men's team more this season, you realize how many eyes are on the men's team, and the women's team is left to its own devices almost.
You've just asked, you just answered pretty much what my next question was going to be, just very briefly, in terms of for people who aren't aware, because we hear these names, around Manchester United women. I guess Matt is obviously the main face that people see. Obviously, you mentioned interim head of women's football at United. What is the kind of the structure around Mark at the moment? As you said, there's not too many people necessarily there on a day-to-day kind of getting involved. What is that kind of looking like a little bit, or is it just those names that you mentioned that kind of are getting involved in the women's team, like I said, more of a day-to-day kind of basis? Yeah,
I think Skinner kind of felt energized, he said, by the commitment of Barada and Ashworth when they first joined in the summer, and he enthused about their presence and what they're trying to do. But as INEOS have said, their priority is to refocus the club's resources entirely on the men's game, and financially, in terms of time that's dedicated to the men's team. And INEOS feel that the women's side have good enough facilities and have good enough coaches to continue as they are. So you have Matt Johnson supporting Skinner, you have Harvey Bustle in terms of head of recruitment, and any kind of negotiations. Matt Hargreaves has been involved in that in previous times. But as I said previously, Ashworth was the glue that binded the kind of women's team to the rest of the club, and he's left.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens with that in terms of whether they fill that role again, whether they go for a different kind of structure in the summer. I know that in the past, obviously, there's been a lot of reports, and I think this has come from INEOS directly. I don't want to misquote them, but I'm pretty sure it was something like by the end of this season, going into next, that structure should be there. Once the men's team has kind of had that focus and settled a little bit, that then the women's team can have that full-on focus as well, that maybe it's not currently got at the moment with the financials and stuff like that. Very quickly then, before I come to two kind of final questions, you mentioned the portable building zone. I wanted to mention that because that was a big story last summer. And I remember that the uproar about that, it went massive. I remember that story at the time. Since then, obviously, a lot more has been seen. Like I said, you mentioned, obviously, you've been there as well. From the photos and videos, I can't lie, I think the facilities look pretty good in terms of what United are in, certainly compared to maybe other clubs in similar kind of league positions or whatever to United across Europe. Would you say that they're, I guess, decent enough for what they're currently using in terms of the facilities wise and stuff like that? Because I know there was maybe concern that there was, I guess, neglect is probably the right word towards the women's team, that they were kind of training in these portable cabins and they weren't getting anything. But from the outside looking in now, that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case, and the facilities are actually not too bad.
I think the most damning thing was that the women's team had to move out to accommodate for the men, especially when the club had said, wow, look at all these amazing facilities we've just created for our women and academy team. So there were teething issues, right? That, there wasn't a immediate plan of what the women's team were going to do when that building plans, when those building works started, because look, they had to go to St. George's Park for 3 weeks while that work took place. Mark Skinner within his right, said that was a bonding period to go away to St George's Park, but it's an inconvenience. It's just change to routine. They come back, and I think they moved in just a week before the first WSL game at West Ham. So it's just that disruption of scheduling. There's lots of activity around Carrington, even regarding car parking, and a lot of uncertainty, I think, about what was going to happen. Then they had a plan in place. And yeah, the portable cabins are, as I said, sturdy, spacious. They have the rooms that they need. I'm sure there would have been some clashes, perhaps, in terms of availability of meeting rooms, or as building work goes, it's a movable feast sometimes. But they've made it work, and one of their priorities was keeping the quality of the pitches. They didn't want to move elsewhere because of the standard of Carrington pitches. And they're able to, still have their canteen, which is in the graduate lounge, which used to be where parents would have meetings for academy players. They have live cooking station. They still have their chef Jimmy. They have the gym, which they see as an upgrade. So yeah, they've been moved out of their building. They wanted to keep them on site. That was important. And I think they're making it work.
No, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the canteen, the food, because the one thing I have heard from people that I speak to is that the food is amazing. That's the one feedback I keep getting back. So that's the one takeaway I'm going to take from this, because that's there was no pun intended there with takeaway, by the way. That's the one thing I'm going to that I hear a lot, is that the food is amazing.
Yeah, and
everything else.
I think someone, maybe it was around the England women's team, when I wrote about that previously, in years gone by, when you didn't have chefs traveling with you, that food is so important for an athlete's life, because if you're training hard, you want that nourishment as well. And they do rave about Jimmy the chef, so shout out to him.
There you go, Jimmy. If you're watching this, some great feedback from all that have ate. That's for sure. My final two questions, then, like I kind of ties in a little bit in terms of contracts and stuff like that. Because you mentioned Matt Johnson, obviously interim until the end of the season. I'm gonna tie these two together, really, because they've both kind of got until the end of the season, but Mark Skinner with an option. In terms of what you think is going to happen there, or have you heard anything around those two? Because Matt obviously is a slightly different situation, obviously coming to the end just on an interim basis. Mark, obviously being the manager, been here a few years now, has got an option in that contract for another year. But what do you reckon there in terms of those two positions? Or do you think maybe they've not been looked at yet? Or what's the kind of feeling, I guess, around those two?
It's the $1 million question, right, Connor? Manchester United love an interim role. And it just feels like we'll put this on pause. We'll get to it once we've finished with the men's team, which is obviously never going to finish. It's a never-ending search for some stability, and so it's piecemeal. It's offering Mark Skinner a 1-year contract with an option didn't scream stability when it happened last May, and it was like, okay, we won't disrupt the women's too much. We won't disrupt the women's team too much. We'll just keep it ticking along without really kind of, really digging in. When Ineos came in and they said, we're going to do a look and learn approach, and we're going to analyze exactly what's going on with the women's team and the structure. And I wrote a piece after a 1 year of Ineos running the women's team, and I spoke to a representative or a spokesperson of Ineos, and I said, what's the strategy to win the WSL title by 2028? What impact have you had? And they were very honest. I cannot fault them for their honesty, because they said Ineos have had limited impact on the women's team. Omar Barada coming in, Dan Ashworth coming in. Dan Ashworth has left. And what is the strategy? Well, Charlotte, there isn't one. And so you look from the outside and you're trying to join these dots together. And when they actually say that, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, there isn't a clear pathway. I spoke about Chelsea's succession plan to win that title by 2028, which is only 3 years away. So, in answer to your question, Matt Johnson will be interim until the end of the season. I don't know what will happen then. Likewise with Mark Skinner. I'm sure they will do a full analysis and speak to people and, you know, weigh up the pros and cons. But at this stage, there is no news of what the future will hold.
No, it's really intriguing, actually, that answer, because especially when you're looking at potential incomings for the summer and other players' contracts, that if I'm a player looking at United and potentially want to go, I want to know who the manager is at the very least, who you're going to be playing under. So that's why I kind of asked that question. And obviously, it's a question on a lot of fans' minds at the moment, purely because of that. That if you're looking at a transfer window, if you're unsure on who the manager is going to be, that potentially delays things as well. So obviously, I don't work at a club or anything like that, but I would be looking at that now, thinking we need to make a decision pretty soon on Mark in particular, and see how that goes. Whether that's trigger the option for another year, although I don't think that helps anybody. Whether that's a new contract or whether that's they tell him outright that this is the last year, I don't know. But I do think it needs resolved one way or another, because they can't keep interiming or 1 year optioning the way through the next few years, in my opinion.
Yeah, but you're bang on. When you want to come to a new club, you want to know who the manager is. That's the first question you ask. Then you want to know what facilities you're going to be looking at. So, yeah, as we said, Manchester United's recruitment, being proactive, thinking that step ahead, it all ties in.
Exactly. And you said this earlier, I think the recruitment's been brilliant. Last summer, I thought, was one of our best summers in terms of a transfer window. So I think the recruitment is there in terms of the scouting process and that kind of thing. It's just about maybe those final things now, getting that stability around the manager and above the manager as well, and finalising all those things out.
I think you also have to be realistic. Like, Manchester United were not in the Champions League. They had to be savvy, and they had to reinforce in key areas, and they had to convince players to come to Manchester United when you are competing with City, Chelsea, Arsenal, who are all in the Champions League, and especially given the departures of key players of Garcia, Zellum, you had to benchmark appropriately of, okay, which players are we going for? Because we're not going to get the creme de la creme.
Bang on. I think Champions League is a big, for a lot of players, especially players looking at maybe they haven't played it before or that are looking to move into that competition. Having that draw of Champions League is a big factor for a lot of players. If you can offer that, it's certainly a big draw factor. The moment United don't have. Obviously, I've got my fingers crossed that a top 3 finish is on for the season currently there. So we'll wait and see. But it is huge when you're looking at it from a player's point of view, particularly players outside of Europe that are looking in. One of the main factors of coming to Europe is because of the Champions League. So, yeah, I'd hope to see that come the end of the season, and we talk more about those incomings. Right, we'll round it off there. I said to Charlotte before when we were arranging this, there's 15 to 20 minutes, I said, but I couldn't cut this one short because you've been absolutely brilliant to chat to about all things, and hopefully I'm sure people have learned a lot along this discussion and things like that. If people want to follow you on various socials and things like that, or find any of the work that you're doing, where can people do all of that if you just want to give that a shout out on here?
Absolutely. So the Athletic main site, we have the UK Women's Football tab where you can follow all our content across the women's game. And obviously any article that I'm writing specifically on the Manchester United women's team will also be on the Manchester United feed. You can follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, Twitter, Charlotte Harpur. You'll find me somewhere. And yeah, thanks for having me on, Connor.
Nice one. No worries at all. You've been absolutely brilliant to chat to. So make sure you're going to follow Charlotte and all the things there. So there's a lot more detail in the articles as well. I'll put those in the description as well, so it's easy for people to find. If you haven't already, make sure you're liking this video and subscribing. If you're listening on Spotify or audio or any of those things, if you leave a 5-star, that'd be absolutely brilliant. See you guys in the next one.